In 1918, one farmer in Sangamon County, Illinois, bet everything he had ever built on a machine that had already killed 36 men. And nobody could agree whether the machine was the problem or the men using it. His neighbors said he had lost his mind. The implement dealer told him Ford had no business in a field. The men at the grain elevator didn't argue with him. They laughed. Every farmer in this county was feeding 8 horses. Every farmer was doing the same thing, the same way, with the same animals that their fathers had done before them. Every farmer had the same problem. Every farmer except one. And by 1923, that one man was farming their land. This is his story. And whether his decision would make him rich or bury him in that same field, nobody in this county could agree. It is April 1918. Planting season does not care that the country is at war. In Sangamon County, Illinois, the same county where Abraham Lincoln once walked the courtrooms and knew every farmer by name, 812 farms are trying to figure out how to plant a full season of corn with half the labor they had last year, because the hands were gone. Every young man who could hold a rifle was in France. Every strong back that used to work the furrow rows at planting time was either in a uniform or on a ship. The 1917 draft had pulled the labor right out of the countryside. It had not looked back. And the horses? The army had taken those too. Thousands of farm horses loaded onto rail cars and shipped to the ports and sent across the ocean to pull artillery through the mud of France. Animals that had worked these fields for 20 years, gone, dying in a war that had nothing to do with corn or soil or the people who depended on both. So there stood the farmer of Sangamon County, short on men, short on horses, staring at a field that did not care about any of it. Because war or no war, people still needed to eat. The field was going to get planted one way or another. The only question was how. The average farm in this county was still running 8 horses, 8 animals that each needed 20 acres of hay just to be kept alive through a year. 8 animals that cost, and this is not a guess, this is the United States government's own calculation, $1.46 for every acre they plowed. That was the world every farmer woke up to. That was the number nobody questioned. That was the way it had always been. Then a newspaper landed on one kitchen table. The Illinois State Journal carried the story. Henry Ford, the man who had already put every working family in America behind the wheel of the Model T, had just made an announcement. He said any farmer in America could own a tractor. Not one of those giant steam monsters. Not the kind of machine that cost more than your farm and needed 6 men just to start it. A real field tractor, small enough to turn in your own lot. Light enough not to sink in soft spring ground. $750. Ford said it would do the work of 8 horses. Ford said it would cost 95 cents an acre. Not $1.46. 95 cents. That is 51 cents saved on every single acre of ground you work. 51 cents that adds up quietly, every day, all season long. A man named Arthur Calloway read that article. He was 41 years old. He had been farming the same 160 acres in Sangamon County since he was 23. He knew every inch of his soil. He knew his horses by name. He set the paper down. He looked out the kitchen window at his 8 horses in the paddock. And he understood something that most men reading the same article did not stop to understand. If Ford was wrong, this was not a bad investment. It was the end of everything he had ever built. He got in his Model T, drove to Springfield, and wrote a check for $750. Every other farmer in Sangamon County kept their horses. Now, before you decide Arthur Calloway was some kind of bold visionary who saw the future clear as glass, you need to understand something. The Fordson had a problem, a serious one. The machine had a design flaw in its rear axle drive. When you were plowing and the blade caught a buried root or a hidden rock and stopped dead, the engine did not stop. The engine's power had nowhere to go, so it went the only place it could. It rotated the entire tractor backward, back wheels on the ground, front wheels lifting, and if the driver did not react, the Eastern Implement dealer printed the numbers. 36 men killed by Fordson tractors in the first year of American sales. 36 men. When Arthur Calloway told Roy Hensley, the International Harvester dealer on 4th Street, what he had bought, Hensley looked at him the way men look at someone who has just announced something that cannot be taken back. "That machine," Hensley said, "will bury you before it buries a seed. Ford makes automobiles. He has got no business in a field." At the grain elevator, the men didn't argue with Arthur Calloway. They laughed, not mean laughter, the easy, comfortable laughter of men who are absolutely certain they are right. Half the county agreed with Roy Hensley. The other half didn't think about it at all, because spending $750 on a machine that had already killed 36 men seemed like something you only did if you were very brave or not very smart. Arthur Calloway was neither of those things. He was something more dangerous than both. He was thorough. Most men weren't afraid of the machine. They were afraid of being wrong. Before Arthur Calloway drove to Springfield, before he wrote that check, he did something that almost none of his neighbors ever thought to do. He read the whole article, not just the headline, not just the price, the whole thing. Every word. He found the follow-up articles, the reports from agricultural colleges, the accident investigation summaries. He wrote to the University of Illinois Extension office in Urbana. He stood outside the Ford dealer in Springfield for 2 hours watching a demonstration, not buying, before he touched a single dollar. Because Arthur Calloway had one question that most men never bothered to ask. The question was not, "Is this machine dangerous?" He already knew it was. 36 men dead in 1 year was not a secret. His question was simpler than that. And harder than that. Why does it flip? And is that something a careful man can prevent? This is the part that nobody else in the county bothered to figure out. The risk wasn't hidden. It was ignored. And it is also the part that got most of them killed. The accident reports all had one thing in common. Every single death happened when the driver was caught off guard. Every single one. Because the tractor gave you a warning. A fraction of a second before it flipped, the front wheels went light. You could feel it through the seat. A subtle shift. Like the nose of the machine trying to rise. If you felt that and pulled the plow lever up immediately, nothing happened. The machine settled back down. You kept working. The Fordson was not a death trap for a man who was paying attention. It was a death trap for a man who wasn't. The machine didn't kill careless men. It exposed them. And Arthur Calloway had spent 18 years behind horse teams that could kick, bite, spook, and crush a man against a fence post without a single moment of warning. He understood that every piece of farm equipment ever built had a way of killing you if you let your guard down. The difference was this: a horse's danger was random. The Fordson's danger was predictable, and if it was predictable, it could be managed. The difference wasn't courage, it was understanding. Now he ran the numbers. 8 horses, each one eating 10 pounds of grain and 20 pounds of hay, every single day. Over a 200-day working season, that is 2,000 pounds of grain and 4,000 pounds of hay per horse per year. Multiply by 8 horses, and you have a feed bill that does not care whether corn prices are high or low. Those horses eat every single day, whether you are making money or not. Add the harnesses, $40 each, replaced every 5 years. Add the farrier, $3 per horse, 6 times a year. Add the land. Arthur was using 22 of his 160 acres to grow hay just to feed those horses. 22 acres that produced nothing he could sell. 22 acres that existed only to feed his equipment. The government's own test confirmed it. Plowing with 8 horses and 2 drivers, $1.46 per acre. Plowing with the Fordson, 95 cents. 51 cents saved per acre on 138 workable acres. That is $70 a season in fuel costs alone. But that was not the number that decided it. This was 22 acres freed from hay, 22 acres now available for corn. At 1918 prices, $1.28 a bushel, at a yield of 40 bushels per acre. That was over $1,000 of corn that his horses had been eating every year. Every year. Arthur Callaway looked at those numbers for a long time. Then he checked them again. Not because they were wrong, because he needed them to be right. Then he sold all 8 horses before the end of May. While they were feeding horses, he was buying land. He didn't explain himself to Tom Riddle, the man who farmed the half-mile fence line along his east field. He didn't go to the County Farm Bureau meeting and argue the case for the tractor. He read the letters from the county agent. He went back to his field. The Fordson came by rail freight from Dearborn, 2,710 pounds of iron, 4 cylinders, 2 big rear drive wheels, 2 small front ones. It smelled of kerosene and hot metal. Arthur's 17-year-old son looked at it the way boys look at things they are both afraid of and desperate to touch. Arthur made his son practice with the plow raised completely off the ground. No furrows, no cutting, just getting the feel of the machine, learning its weight, learning how it communicated through the seat. Because the real test was not buying the machine. The real test was whether it would kill him. On the 4th day, they planted. In 1919, crop prices were still high. Corn hit nearly $1.50 a bushel. Arthur planted everything he could reach, including those 22 acres of former hay ground. He had a good year. His neighbors had a good year too. But then came 1920, and nobody, not the farmers, not the banks, not the government, saw what was coming. When the war ended, European farms came back online. The desperate demand for American grain that had kept prices high for 3 years dried up. And when it dried up, it happened fast. Corn prices that had been $1.28 a bushel in 1918 were below 50 cents by December 1920. By December 1921, 78% below their wartime peak. 78%. Think about what that means for a man who borrowed money at wartime prices to buy wartime land. For the first time since buying the Fordson, Arthur Callaway wasn't completely sure he had been right. Across the county, farms started going quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the season. The horses still ate, every single day, whether the corn sold or not. The harness payments were still due. The mortgage was still the same number on the same piece of paper, and the income had been cut in half, and then cut again. Men who had worked the same land for 20 years started walking away from it without turning back. Farm incomes across Illinois fell 60% between 1919 and 1921. Arthur Callaway's Fordson sat in his barn from November to March and cost him exactly nothing. No feed, no farrier, no harness oil, no 20 acres of hay. It simply waited. When spring came, he cranked it up and went back to work. Tom Riddle's farm, the one along the east fence line, the one whose owner had told him the Fordson would bury Arthur before it buried a seed, went to the bank in March of 1922. The corn prices had broken Tom Riddle before the Fordson ever got the chance. The auction was on a cold March morning. The ground was still hard. The sky was flat and gray. 11 men stood in a field that Tom Riddle had farmed for 16 years. 9 of them were there to watch. 1 was the county bank officer who held the mortgage. 1 was Arthur Callaway. The bidding didn't last long. When it was over, Arthur walked to the table, signed his name, did not look at Tom Riddle. He folded the deed, put it in his coat pocket, and walked back to his truck. His second Fordson, bought in 1920 when Ford had dropped the price to $395, was parked at the edge of the field. He had driven it over that morning. He didn't feel victory, just confirmation. He drove it home across Tom Riddle's land, his land now. By spring, the same fields that had nearly buried him were the ones he drove across alone. By 1923, 75% of every tractor sold in the United States was a Fordson. In 10 years, the horse would be all but gone from the American farm. The farmers who waited, who kept their horses through 1919 and 1920, were not fools. They were cautious. And being cautious around a machine that had already killed 36 men in a single year is not stupidity. It is reasonable. But there is a difference between caution and stillness. Arthur Callaway was cautious. He read every word written about that tractor before he spent $1. He understood the danger better than any man who was laughing at him. He just understood it accurately. Which is a completely different thing from being afraid of it. The danger was never the machine. The danger was not understanding it. The Fordson that sat in Arthur Callaway's field in 1923 was the same machine that had killed 36 men in 1918. It had not changed. Not one bolt, not 1 inch of iron. The difference was that he understood it. The field doesn't care what you meant to do. It only records what you planted. This story draws from documented history. The Fordson tractor sales records are real. The 36 deaths in 1918, documented. The corn price collapse of 1920 and 1921, 78% in 18 months, verified by Federal Reserve agricultural reports. The agricultural history of Sangamon County, Illinois, is real. Arthur Callaway, Tom Riddle, Roy Hensley are fictional characters placed inside that real history. The numbers are real. The land is real. The man is the story. If you're the kind of person who studies before you move, not after you fail, this channel is for you. We tell the stories of the people who built American farming one quiet decision at a time. Women who farmed without their names on the deed. Black families who built 15 million acres of land against every law written to stop them. And men like Arthur Callaway, who read the whole article while everyone else stopped at the headline. Most people stop at the headline. A few read the whole thing. And those few change everything. The only question is, which one are you? Leave that answer in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe. I'll have a new story for you tomorrow morning. This is American soil.